Welcome to Criminally Underreported Murder Mysteries, and thank you for coming for part 2 of Michelle Knotek's story. You must really, really love come. When we last left off, we were introduced to Michelle Knotek, a woman so horrid she might have frightened me away from vaginas forever, like a reverse scared straight, or a weekend at Michael Jackson's home. After hearing about how she abused and stole from all her husbands, I think I'd be happier sticking my dick in a wood chipper. It would probably hurt less than being married to Michelle. But the true victims were her kids, Nikki, Sami, Tori, and eventually Shane. Let's not forget Kathy Loreno, a woman down on her luck who trusted Michelle, only to later find that trust burnt and discarded in the wind like her ashes. Michelle was a bad person. She enjoyed hurting people and only cared about herself. And that didn't stop after Kathy's death. You see, kids with narcissistic parents have to balance being a person with empathy and loving someone whose behavior consistently shows a lack of it. When raised by people like Michelle, turning a blind eye is a survival tactic. If I met someone in the streets like Michelle, I'd grab a pair of dark shades of piano and start singing Hit the Road Jack. That joke is probably older than most of the people listening to it. Just Google Ray Charles. I'd like to first and foremost apologize. I'm sorry for the late episode. I started playing this innocent little game called Power World. It's a mixture between Pokemon, guns, and slave labor. And I don't mean to brag, but I went full Mike Vick in that game. And for Black History Month, I set up a whole plantation. Lincoln made us free, and now I'm about to make us even. But I'm glad to be back. Yep, Sam is on the ones and twos like Jeffrey Epstein in a maternity ward. When we last left off, Shane told Nikki about collecting evidence of Kathy's abuse to give to the police. It was successful sooner than he expected. In a little less than a day, Shane gathered all of Kathy's pictures. All of these were documented evidence of Kathy's abuse, torture, and torment. Shane tried his best to hide all this evidence from Michelle, but it wasn't long until Michelle found the bag of pictures. She had a psychic ability for finding pictures that didn't include her ugly face. She was so enraged. That's why every picture in that house included a brunette gorilla with a brick for a face. Michelle. Shane would be beaten as punishment, but the real punishment would begin when the kid's father, David, returned. Michelle informed him about the evidence Shane was hiding. Dave was a man who was 2 brain cells short of a Biden, and he would normally let Michelle do the thinking for him. Dave never really even wanted to hurt his kids, or Kathy for that matter, but when his wife ordered him to do something, he'd do it. Give Donald Trump some lopsided breasts and a brunette wig, and you could probably get David to storm the Capitol. Michelle even convinced David that the kids were the ones abusing Kathy. Michelle held his brain cells in the same purse that she held his dick, and trust me, there was more than enough room for the brain cells. David, for his part, didn't believe that Shane would turn on them. Adopted or not, Shane was his biological nephew. But Michelle knew that David also deeply loved his youngest daughter, Tori. See, Tori was the only biological daughter between Michelle and Dave. Tori was also the youngest child. So he was enraged when Michelle came out of Shane's room, claiming to find Tori's underwear hidden there. It was all a lie. That underwear was planted by Michelle. Michelle was really out here planting baby's underwear like she was trying to grow an Epstein tree. Michelle would rile David about this over and over and over again until one day he just blew up and snapped at Shane. David beat him so badly, Shane left the house and never returned. Or at least that's what Michelle told Nikki and her younger sister Sami when they came home. Once all the girls got home, Michelle brought everyone in the car and they all went looking for Shane. This search, like a lot of my prior relationships, ended prematurely, and with all the women involved left unsatisfied. Michelle was done looking for Shane and took the girls home. Shame would be no more of an issue for Michelle and David. The following year, however, was absolute hell for Nikki. Michelle would pick Nikki as the primary target for her abuse. It would go from the usual grovelings and beatings and escalating to her even drugging her on a few occasions. While isolated in school, Nikki didn't have many resources and friends. But by the time she graduated, she saw college as the only option to escape her dangerous and unstable mother. However, Michelle started limiting what clothes she could wear. So when her clothes got dirty or ripped, Nikki chose to stay home from school instead of looking like she was homeless, or worse, borrowed clothes from Kanye West. Despite being a loyal, loving, and obeying child, for nearly 2 decades, Nikki felt less like Michelle's daughter and more like the dirt beneath her feet. It wasn't until Nikki witnessed Michelle opening a postcard from Shane that Michelle began to panic. Michelle made sure to read this letter out loud to everyone, probably to let them know that she could still read. Shane in the letter mentioned how he found a beautiful girlfriend, a new job, and a great home in Alaska, how he was happy with his new life, but he still missed and loved his mother dearly. This set Nikki off because, first of all, no one is happy in Alaska. You have to worry about getting attacked by polar bears, flooding, and your dick freezing off. Alaska is filled with so much danger and abuse, I'm surprised the state's nickname isn't Michelle Knotek. Nikki was also skeptical about the "I love you, Mom" message to Michelle. I mean, I could get shot in both of my nuts, and I would probably love the bullets more than Shane loved Michelle. She was a trash mother, and the postcards were crawling full of maggots. But Michelle drilled into Nikki and Sam, if anyone asks, Shane is in Alaska, and Kathy is traveling the country with the love of her life. Most of the lies would fall onto David. Shane was his nephew, and Kathy was from his side of the family. David was often the one carrying the lies and the bloodshed on his shoulders, like he was a politician running for re-election. A couple thousand more dead, and David could be Biden's running mate. Nikki was different. Shane was fierce, bold, and filled with so much love in his heart that it could wash away the deep scars of the abuse. Nikki loved Shane. It was that love that stopped Nikki from turning into a submissive puddle like her father or me on a first date. I don't mean to brag, but my bitch-getting outfit is a cup of ice and a straw. On one fateful day, Nikki was attacked, unprovoked, by her mother. Michelle was just a little under 110 pounds at the time, but she was never used to anyone actually fighting back. Michelle was really shocked when her own daughter, Nikki, got up and shoved her to the ground. Nikki screamed at her and then ran. She was running all throughout the house screaming, "I pushed Mom." She was partially excited and partially scared. After telling her sister this, she continued running out of the house for her life. Nikki was alone in all of this, so Michelle figured the worst punishment she could do was send Nikki to live with one of her aunts for a week. Nikki would be out of Michelle's hair for a bit, isolated, and she wouldn't be spreading these dangerous ideas to her sister, Sami. For Nikki, on the other hand, living with her aunt was a reward. Nikki was an abused child, and if she gets an award for beating Michelle's ass, Nikki would be beating that ass up and down so hard that Ray Rice would sue for copyright. Nikki was sent to live with her aunt for a week as punishment, but this aunt says that Nikki was so well-behaved and pleasant that she kept her for an additional week. Nikki still begged to stay after that, so her aunt got her in contact with her grandmother, Laura Stalling, a few members of the local church too. Nikki moved in with her grandmother, Laura. Initially, Nikki was confused. Michelle's mother was the total opposite of her. Laura was kind, honest, and caring. Kind, honest, and caring are words that can't legally be within 600 miles of Michelle. Nikki began opening up. Laura believed every word, or at least at first. Laura helped raise Michelle after her mother died. She believed that Michelle could be cruel, self-centered, and even violent. But you never picture the kids that you raise being killers. Years back, Lauren had been to the house a couple of times to check in on the kids. Michelle kept a clean house, so there was little signs that Michelle was abusing any of the kids. Michelle hid the abuse better than I hide my Pornhub searches. Laura did, however, notice that the bed that Shane was sleeping in was tattered, old, and more stained than my bed sheets on a lonely Friday night. It's now in the story that I actually have to drop a little plot twist on you. Shane was actually Michelle's nephew, not David. Isn't that a crazy plot twist and not just me fucking up the research for this story? After Nikki told her everything, Lauren felt sick. She was filled with guilt. Lauren was guilty for allowing Shane to live in that house and for not paying closer attention to their circumstances. But guilt is a lot like me on a third date. It'll either eat you out or motivate you to drop it for something better. From that day on, Nikki would have less and less contact with Michelle and the family. Whenever Michelle would try to pull her back into the fold, Nikki would remind her she knew where the bodies were hidden. For the first time in her life, Michelle would back down. Nikki is so good at getting violent murderers to back down that the UN is flying her out to Palestine next. During this time, Nikki would work with her grandmother to communicate with investigators about Kathy's abuse. But we're only about a third way into the story, so you can be sure that the investigators took their damn time with it. The only time police officers hurry a case is if it's Coors Light or Dunkin' Donuts. In the meantime, Nikki would recover from her lifetime of childhood abuse. Nikki would find a career she loved, a family that loved her, and got the therapy and love she needed to live a healthy life. I think that type of lifestyle is called the reverse Kanye West. But Nikki was not the only child stuck in the care of Michelle. Sami was the second oldest child, and now that Nikki was gone, she had a big target on her back. However, Sami had something called friends. I had friends too, but they pulled it off of Netflix. Some of Sami's closest friends knew about her mother, so they would often hang around the house to make sure that Michelle wouldn't hurt her. One time, they stopped by the house to ask if Sami could go out with them. Michelle tried to shoo them away by lying about her being sick. Sami's friends instead chose to stay in their driveway, honking and hollering until Michelle let Sami leave. On another occasion, Sami came home late after going out with her friends one night. Michelle would, in punishment, lock her outside all night. Sami's friend from that day on stayed parked outside of the house, honking their car door until Sami would be let in every time they dropped her off, and even stayed a little after to make sure she wasn't kicked out. Sami also wore more fashionable and revealing clothing than her sisters, so Michelle couldn't hurt her in ways that would leave bruises or scars. That's why women should wear sexier and more revealing clothing, so we as men can check for signs of abuse. Sami, because of her upbringing or because she was a teenager, began slipping in her grades. Near the tail end of her senior year, despite all of Sami's support structures and friends, Michelle's punishments would sometimes cause her to fall behind in grades. When school officials confronted her about her homework inconsistencies, Sami would let it slip that she hadn't done it the previous night because she was dealing with her mother's abusive fits. Sami went to the same school as her younger sister, Tori. So when they heard about this, they began looking at Tori. And what they found was enough to start an investigation, if and only if Sami worked with them. Sami was brought to the office and told by school administrators that they noticed the abuse and wanted to get the authorities involved. But Sami panicked. She hated the way her mother treated them, but Sami was afraid of being separated from her family. That might be strange for someone looking on the outside of Sami's domestic circumstances. Michelle has all the warmth and comfort of a dick in a freezer, and I wouldn't let either near any kids. But apart from her teachers, Michelle and David were the only adults that Sami knew. Beyond her little home of homicide and abuse, there was an uncertain world out there. Sami's home had Michelle, but the outside world had killers, kidnappers, and Kanye West. Michelle might be evil, but have you heard every album after graduation? Sami ended up taking back her statement, and the school dropped any further investigation. Sami would end up graduating and even getting accepted into a university. Unfortunately, Sami was more broke than me after tax season. Sami filled out forms for federal student aid, but Sami needed Social Security documents and signatures from her parents to complete the application. So Sammy's FAFSA application was looking more empty and barren than my Tinder matches. Sami knew Michelle wouldn't budge without being squeezed. Sami was the second child to remind Michelle she knew where the bodies were buried. And that got Michelle to fill out those paperwork so fast. Damn, Michelle's body count benefits her kids so much that I'm surprised her last name isn't Kardashian. After entering college, Sami was able to slowly distance herself from Michelle. By this time, Nikki was completely out of her family's life. Nikki may not ball like Allen Iverson, but when it comes to her home life, they were one and the same. Both Nikki and Sami stayed in contact with each other. Sami would eventually meet up with her grandmother, Laura. She would corroborate Kathy's murder story. Sami told the investigating officers all the details, but since Kathy wasn't killed by an acorn, the police investigation wasn't exactly firing off. Sami and Nikki would continue living their individual lives. The two would, on a few occasions, meet their dad, Dave, a few times on his traveling job. Both Sami and Nikki hoped they could see a man worth being angry at, someone who sided with their abusive mother because he hated them and wanted to see them suffer. But the man they met wasn't even worth being angry at. Dave was a docile man. He had worked himself into a grave, trying to please and obey Michelle. He made enough money to take care of his family and hardly spent a penny on himself. It was clear that Dave was not Michelle's beast dishing out punishment, but instead her sick, neutered dog. In other words, Dave was just her bitch with no balls. In the meantime, there was still one child stuck under the parenting of Michelle, Tori. Tori was too young to remember Kathy and only heard about Nikki through horror stories Michelle would tell her. She was convinced that Nikki was violent and regularly attacked Michelle and the other kids. During this time, contributing to Sami's college was eating out of the family's budget. They had sold their prior home and moved, but Michelle began working with full-time jobs just so they could make ends meet. Being a full-time mother wasn't paying the bills. Apparently, her bank didn't accept children's tears as mortgage payments. She should have banked with the Catholic Church. I heard they're accepting any kid's fluids as payment. Michelle surprisingly landed a job as a social worker. I guess she tried applying for other jobs, but the orphanage was only accepting child molesters, and the FBI was only hiring terrorists. Somehow, Michelle landed a job as a social worker. Despite the brand new job, Michelle was the same old bitch. She abused her clients from 9 to 5 and was so dedicated that she brought home her work to her daughter, Tori. She would be beaten, yelled at, and starved and forced to grovel like her other siblings. Michelle, on the other hand, was actually improving as a parent. Yeah, she could now parent half as good as an abortion clinic dumpster, and at only a third of the cost. The only reason she was slightly more kind to Tori was because she now had someone new to beat. If beating something makes this woman a decent mother, give her a dick, privacy, and my web search history, and she'll come out a half-decent mom. Michelle's new target for abuse was 81-year-old James McClintock and 57-year-old Ronald Woodworth. They were both her social working clients. There was not any visible evidence of abuse for James McClintock, but 6 months after Michelle became his caretaker, James died, a blunt force trauma to the head, leaving his $137,000 home in the hands or paws of his dog Sissy. Damn, even after death, these bitches be taking your home. Michelle would take Sissy into her care, and shortly after, Michelle would report Sissy as dead, leaving her as the sole owner of the home. Sissy would later be found in a shelter a few miles from Michelle's home. Ronald was a different story. He was a gay military vet who lived in a trailer home, where everything I searched for on Tinder after all the good pussy dries up. Ronald had a bad relationship with his boyfriend and with his mother. He gained a restraining order, lost his trailer home, and ended up living with Michelle. Yes, God fucked him so badly that he'll be shitting out the Holy Spirit for the rest of his life. Michelle offered to let Ronald live in the house. Ronald, for all his faults, was kind, funny, and great with kids. He was a regular Ronald McDonald without the creepy makeup and the secret kids' playroom in the back of the restaurant. Ronald loved history, and would talk about major historical figures with Tori, who was in middle school by now. Ronald was one of the few friends that Tori had in the Knotek household, and the abuse he went through made it even worse. On some occasions, both Dave and Michelle would gang up on and assault him. On other occasions, he'd be forced to grovel. He'd be starved, stripped naked, for days, denied food, and forced into cramped spaces underneath Michelle's work desk for hours. One of the worst things that Michelle made Ronald do was jump off of high places. So when he hit the ground, all that force left his legs and knees more devastated than Bill Cosby when he heard Diddy was stealing his drink recipes. Michelle would make Ronald climb up higher and higher things to jump off of until he'd be jumping off of shit so high that you'd swear he's Donald Trump's wife trying to get a discount on the divorce lawyer. Tori, at her young age, had to see all of this, and even was forced to dole out punishment on her friend. But every night, Ronald would sneak into Tori's room and remind her it wasn't her fault and that they were still friends. These would be some of the last words that Ronald ever told Tori. One day, Michelle told Ronald to jump again. He was still bruised from the prior punishment, and he was weak from little food. And this time, when he jumped, he didn't get back up. Michelle yelled at him, kicked him, but Ronald never got back up. Michelle made 2 impromptu phone calls. Sami had been bothering her mother for weeks to take Tori out on a big road trip. Michelle was panicking and looking for any reason to get Tori out of the home. The only reason Michelle let Sami take her for the weekend is because Jeffrey Epstein didn't call first. Tori and Michelle made arrangements for the following weekend. Michelle would call Dave to hurry home as soon as he could. In the meantime, Michelle lied to Tori about Dave getting sick and being taken to the hospital for treatment. Dave would arrive 2 days later. The two would make arrangements to dispose of the body after Sami picked up Tori. Sami wasn't going to take Tori out for a road trip. Sami was still in contact with her sister Nikki. After their many meetings with investigators, the two concluded that even with their grandmother's help, Michelle was still too white to be arrested. The two talked in private with each other. They realized something. Out of everyone involved in the case, they were the two working the hardest to make sure Kathy was receiving any justice. The police took both of their statements and should have interviewed all involved parties. Of course, Michelle and Dave would lie about it. Tori was too young to know any of the details, but Shane wouldn't have turned away the opportunity to help Kathy's family. She was still reported as a missing person, and her family kept the investigation open. Nikki and Sami then remembered that when Kathy was killed, Dave would send postcards back to the home, impersonating her. And after Shane ran away, he sent one back too. Between the search for Shane being too short and the letter back to his loving mother and him not reaching out to the police first, the girls finally accepted what they knew all along. Shane was dead. And join us next time for part 3. I'm just fucking with you. Nikki pressured Sami into setting up a road trip with Tori. Nikki already lost one of her siblings, and she needed to make sure this one was all right. Sami picked up Tori, and as the two started on their secret rendezvous, while Michelle and Dave started the process of disposing of Ronald. Tori was at a restaurant eating sushi for the first time ever. Ooh, I remember the first time I ate raw Asian fish. She even bought me sushi afterwards as a thank you for helping her out. Tori was too young to remember Nikki. All she had to go by were the stories that Michelle would tell. So when Nikki was told about their secret meeting, she started to panic up until the day that she met. Meanwhile, David and Michelle moved Ronald's body into the freezer. The two needed to find a location to burn and dump the body. The family moved houses, so their backyard was no longer an option. Dave reassured Michelle that he would scope out some local places and take care of it. When Tori finally met Nikki, her heart overfilled with love that she hadn't known was there in the first place. As the girls reconnected, they began discussing all the good memories they had as kids. Their mother was Michelle Knotek, so that discussion was too short to even fit in a TikTok. And then they started talking about all the stories about the crazy things that their mother used to do. Tori was confused since their mother still acted that way. The beatings, the punishments, and even the hurting of her friend Ronald. When Sami and Nikki heard about Ronald, they were angry, horrified, and shocked. But I guess not surprised. That's when Sami and Nikki decided to tell Tori about Kathy. Sami was horrified. Just a few days earlier, her mother had begun hiding Ronald from her, claiming that he was sick, only to later tell her Ronald left town. The meeting was coming to an end, and Michelle expected Tori back, and soon. Tori didn't want to go back, but the girls remembered how slow to act the police had been. Michelle must have been the big bad wolf, because all the little piggies in blue couldn't build a case to convict her. So the girls decided to keep quiet, at least for now, and call their grandmother immediately, and keep a low profile, while they all decided what to do next. Nikki returned home so pale that you could mistake her for a ghost or a Taylor Swift fan. After a brief chat with their grandmother, Laura, Sami called Tori. The two went back and forth for a bit, whether or not Tori could just stay at the home until she was old enough to live on her own. It was a cruel request, but both Sami and Nikki had done the same, and if she didn't have any direct evidence of Ronald's death, she wouldn't be killed like Shane. But Tori knew if she did nothing, Ronald's family would spend the rest of their lives haunted by his unknown fate. Truth was the only exorcism for their haunting reality, and if Ronald couldn't find peace in life, Tori had to make sure her friend found it in death. Laura would be the one to call the police. They quickly stormed the house. I guess she told them that Michelle was holding some donuts hostage. Laura instructed all the girls to avoid answering any calls from Michelle. They arrested Michelle and Dave. While the two were in holding, Michelle's her husband, was the first to crack. Being separated from his wife allowed him to breathe without Michelle sucking the soul out of him. Maybe we can do the same for Will Smith. Slowly, the story began to unravel itself. I need you to promise me that you won't be mad. And if you do break that promise, your bitch ass better buy me a boba tea. A couple of days before Shane's death, Shane came to Nikki with photographs of Kathy's abuse, right? Shane only told Nikki about his plan to show the police and get justice for Kathy. Nikki knew that her mother deserved prison and was in the wrong, but wrong can't be easily rooted out if it's in your own blood. So Nikki went to Michelle the next day and told. She found it, beat him, placed Tori's stained panties in his room to get Dave to beat him too, and convinced Dave that Shane needed to be put down to protect the family. Dave shot Shane in the back of the head while the girls were at school. Shane's body, like Kathy's, like they were planning to do to Ronald's body, was burnt to ash and tossed to the sea, never to be seen again. You owe me a boba, and I owe you an explanation. While I would usually leap at any occasion to call a scared little girl a bitch, I don't think this situation fits. When you study cults like Heaven's Gate, Jonestown, and Kanye West fan, bad taste in music, spending too much money on shitty clothes, and fear all seem to be the connecting factors. People are driven to cults because they lack something, but they often stay because they're afraid. Someone might stay in a church because they're afraid of the rapture, and people will still listen to Kanye West because they're afraid of good music. Nikki was afraid of losing her family, and she never had an example of what a healthy one looked like. An abused child, if shown healthy love, will aspire towards healthy relationships because they fear a life without it. And an abused child not shown healthy love will avoid healthy relationships because of their abuse. They fear that they're not worthy of healthy relationships. Kathy and Donald came to Michelle as adults, and both could have left, but didn't because of that same fear. The children born into it never had a chance to appreciate a better life. Michelle and David Knotek would be arrested. They would be convicted of second-degree murder of Shane and be given 13 years, while Michelle's plea guaranteed her 22 years for Kathy and Roland's murder. Dave had since attempted to apologize to his daughter, with only Sami and Tori willing to accept it. Being that close to Shane couldn't allow Nikki to forgive the man who shot him. Michelle was released at the age of 68 after serving 18 years of the 22. She left prison with no family waiting for her, and at the age of 68, she certainly won't have time to make any more. I can only hope that her labia is as shriveled and cold as she is. I certainly won't be the one to figure that out. The only thing more depressing than a story about lifelong abuse and a triple homicide is my bank account. These episodes are as inconsistent as my sex life. I drop an episode and everyone is like, "Is that it?" And I'm panting after 2 minutes of doing this thing. Jesus himself would have to touch my dick to make it work, and I'm just too old for the Catholics to give it a try. My Patreon, like my height, is still progressing, so from now on, anyone who signs up for the remainder of the year at any amount will get a free, short, custom message recorded by me. And that's once a month for every month until the end of the year at patreon.com/distantlysocial, or check the show notes. You can also find me reading funny memes on TikTok to pledge my loyalty to the government of China. As an American, my heart believes that treason is bad, but my stomach knows that Chinese food is good. I've got so much MSG in my system, I could use my blood as soy sauce. Check me out at Too Hot to Samuel on TikTok. And next time on Criminally Unreported Murder Mysteries, a friend of mine once asked me if I would suck dick for $1 million. And now I won't tell you how I answered that question. But when I heard Celeste Beard married a multi-millionaire that was more than double her age, I did start salivating a little bit. All Celeste had to do was pretend to be an Oscar Myers casing and wrap her mouth around some wiener every once in a while. She instead chose a course of events that would leave 2 of her ex-lovers dead and a 3rd ex-lover in the crosshairs of a hitman. Celeste Beard was so freaky that when you ask her about her body count, she has to give 2 different numbers. Come again next time for the story of Celeste Beard.